Right, so now you've gathered a team and it's time to write your own code of conduct. And the code of conduct is a series of guidelines for your participants to know what behavior is acceptable and what behavior is not acceptable in your space. It will also be a tool of communication that will create a feeling of safety, because if you tell people what's okay and what's not, then they can know that by entering their space they can expect some behavior and they can expect some behavior to be absent of that space. And so before we get started, I would like you to read 3 codes of conduct that I've selected for you. I've tried to pick a few different versions so that you can get an idea of what it can entail. So pause the video, look at the video description, find the 3 links, and read those code of conducts, and then come back with me. I'll wait. All right, so now that you've read those 3 codes of conduct, we can discuss a little more about the choices you can make about your code of conduct. The first thing is the length of the code of conduct. My personal belief is that a code of conduct is only useful if it's read by the participant. So I always try to keep my code of conduct on the shorter side, but the shorter you write, the less into details you can go. So I generally prefer to have shorter code of conducts, but you might need to have more lengthy one if you want to really go into the details you want to. There's a few examples that you can find of people who have different lengths of code of conduct. They have a short version and then the longer version. And kind of the short version is for everybody who needs to do a quick read and kind of get a sense of what your space is about. And then there's a longer version that's helpful if you really want to go into more details about the expectation you have for the people in your space. The second thing that I think is important is how much precise or versus how much vague you are. And in general, being vague and like giving overarching values is usually a little bit my preference. You could go into very specific details of what behavior is acceptable and what behavior isn't, but I don't want to create a feeling with my participant that they can argue with like, oh, what I did was not exactly that line, but it was slightly different. So for example, if you say like, you need to get verbal consent before touching someone, then people can go into more details about like, well, I didn't touch them, I just bumped into them, and kind of argue with those things. So I prefer to have more general and slightly more vague overarching principle in my code of conduct. It also helps to be shorter. But again, that's a matter of preference and taste, and depending on what you need for your space, you might want to select something more precise or more vague. The third thing I want you to think about is positive versus negative. I generally tend to prefer positively worded code of conduct so that they're not too heavy to read. And again, I want people to feel good and feel safe in my space. So I usually like to frame my code of conduct about the rights that people have and kind of like welcome them into the space and be like, welcome, we're so happy you're here. Thank you for participating in this. And as you participate, here are the things that you're entitled to, and kind of frame it in a very positive light, rather than having codes of conduct that are just a series of you can't do that, you can't do that, you can't do this, you can't do that. They're very heavy and negative. And I think you can achieve the same message, but just wording it differently help, I think, people read it and embrace it and not feel threatened by the code of conduct. So those are the things that I would like you to think about as you write your code of conduct. I would like also to reflect on your values. So based on the inventory you've taken of your space, I would like you to think of who you would like to see more included. And as you take this class, there will be a third module in this series. And the third module will talk a little more about what you can do specifically to make some group of people feel more included. So if you have no idea of where to start, I would suggest to skip ahead to module 3, read it, and then come back to writing your own code of conduct. But if you already know what you can do and what behaviors you want and you don't want in your space, then I would encourage you to just go ahead, gather your safer space team, and then write your code of conduct. Good luck.